Racist judge laughs at teen in court, then discovers he's a genius attorney. Welcome to a tale unlike any other, a story where prejudice stands brazenly at the bench, but justice rises from an unexpected source. Imagine a bustling American courtroom where whispers echo in tense silence. Gavel strikes invoke dread, not fairness. In this charged environment, a teenage defendant enters, head held high despite the odds. Yet the judge, hardened by biases and convinced of his superiority, smirks in contempt. Little does he know, hidden behind youthful eyes lies a brilliance that will shift the entire legal world. You are about to witness a battle of wit, resolve and heart where truth must triumph over prejudice, and one determined teen wields the sharpest sword of all, the law. Before we dive in, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. If you're excited about this story, let us know. If you enjoyed the video, press 1. If not, press O. Your feedback really inspires me to gather more uplifting and meaningful stories. Courtroom 14 of the Chicago Metropolitan Courthouse buzzed with subdued chatter. The stale smell of old wood polish and the faint odor of burnt coffee gave the afternoon a sense of weary routine. Spectators, some journalists, some curious onlookers packed the benches, waiting for the day's next case. Judge Malcolm Robertson, a man infamous for his brusque manner and quick judgments, sat behind an imposing mahogany bench, adjusting his reading glasses. Over his robe glinted a small Harvard Law School lapel pin, a trophy of his self-professed elite pedigree. He was a tall, angular man in his early 60s, with thinning silver hair combed back meticulously. The lines on his face spoke of decades of scorn, displeasure, and a conviction that all criminals, especially those who looked a certain way, deserved the harshest sentences possible. Though no one dared say it aloud, rumors of Judge Robertson's racial biases rippled through the halls. Defense attorneys whispered that if you were a person of color, especially young and male, your only hope was impeccable evidence or an appeal to a higher court. In a corner, a bailiff announced the next case. Enter 17-year-old Darius King, wearing an ill-fitting button-down shirt and tie. The hush in the room grew tangible. He was black, his youthful face set in calm determination. 3 nights before, Darius had been arrested after a minor altercation outside a Walgreens. The judge stared down at him, lips curling in an almost imperceptible sneer. In his mind, Darius was just another troublemaking kid, destined for a jail cell. To everyone's astonishment, there was no public defender flanking Darius, no slick private attorney smoothing the edges of the teen's case. Instead, Darius approached the counsel's table alone. A slight ripple of surprise washed through the crowd. The teen carefully placed a battered manila folder on the table, his hands betraying only the slightest tremor. Judge Robertson let out a low chuckle, unamplified, but clearly audible to signal how amusing he found the sight. A single, sharp voice from the spectators hissed in protest, "This is a joke, right? Where's his lawyer?" But Darius did not turn his head. He stood straight, glancing firmly at the judge, unwavering. Something potent flickered behind Darius's eyes, a silent declaration that he was ready to meet whatever came next. The moment Darius spoke, the energy in the courtroom shifted. "Your Honor," he said, his voice neither wavering nor overly loud, "I intend to represent myself." A storm of murmurs rippled across the benches. Even the court reporter, who prided herself on her stoicism, darted her gaze in curiosity. Judge Robertson leaned forward, arching a condescending eyebrow. "You intend to what?" he asked with slow, deliberate emphasis. His disapproval was apparent, not just from his tone, but the way his sneer deepened. "I will be defending myself in these proceedings," Darius repeated. He calmly opened the manila folder, pulling out carefully prepared documents. He placed them in order, unhurried. The silent, meticulous routine clashed with the chaotic swirl of conversation happening behind him. "Are you certain you don't want a public defender?" the judge asked, with feigned politeness. Beneath the question was a clear subtext. "You must be out of your mind." Darius looked the judge directly in the eye. "I've researched the allegations, and I've concluded I can mount a competent defense. I appreciate the offer, Your Honor, but I've made my decision." Another hush settled, interrupted only by the squeak of the bailiff's shoes as he stepped forward to maintain order. Judge Robertson took a moment to smooth the edge of his robe, letting out a soft chuckle. "Well," he finally said, "this will be interesting." His words carried the sting of mockery, echoing across the silent, tension-laced gallery. Those observing exchanged sideways glances. They expected an immediate meltdown of teen angst or confusion. But Darius's face reflected neither arrogance nor timidity, only careful resolve. His posture, so straight and unwavering, hinted at a steel spine no one had seen coming. The hush in the courtroom grew almost suffocating, as if the air itself was waiting for the next move. Judge Robertson leaned forward. "Prosecutor, you may begin." The assistant district attorney, a man named Garrett Lowell, was known for mercilessly dissecting cases. His unwavering track record included taking on notorious gangs, corporate embezzlers, and even corrupt politicians. Now, he was up against a teenage defendant representing himself. The entire scenario radiated a bizarre, lopsided tension. Lowell stood, buttoning his suit jacket with a confident smirk, sure that this boy would be easy prey. The onlookers prepared for a swift, humiliating takedown, but from the corner of his eye, Lowell saw Darius scanning a series of legal references, seemingly unruffled by the mounting pressure. The teen's mild, focused expression whispered an underlying message: "Underestimate me at your peril." "I'll keep this short," Lowell began, pacing in front of the jury box with a controlled swagger. Darius King was apprehended at approximately 11:45 p.m. in the parking lot of a Walgreens. Officers responded to a 911 call reporting disorderly conduct and minor property damage, a broken window, presumably from an altercation. "We have a sworn statement from the store's security guard who saw Darius fleeing the scene. It's clear he's guilty of vandalism, possibly assault, and disturbing the peace. The defense, Mr. King has no alibi and no witnesses." Judge Robertson, arms crossed, looked down at Darius expectantly. He almost smirked, convinced the teen had no legitimate response. But to everyone's astonishment, Darius maintained his composure. He rose to address the accusations with a calm, measured tone. "May I cross-examine the security guard's statement?" he asked. Judge Robertson's eyebrows rose. "I suppose," he said, dismissively waving his hand. "But let's keep it brief. I don't want to waste the court's time." The security guard was summoned, a tall, burly man with short-cropped hair. He walked to the stand, briefly locking eyes with Darius. The man cleared his throat. "I saw him all right," he insisted, glancing at the judge. "He was near the broken window. He ran when I spotted him, had guilt written all over him." Darius approached with slow, deliberate steps, one hand clasping a sheaf of papers. "Sir," he began, voice steady, "could you specify how you recognized me? The parking lot was dimly lit at that hour." The guard shrugged. "Kid, you were wearing a red hoodie, and your face was pretty clear under the parking lot lights." Darius nodded. That same evening, Walgreens surveillance cameras should have captured the area. "Did you review those tapes?" The guard's eyes flickered uneasily. Well, I'm not sure. That's for the police to do, not me," Darius continued in a calm, methodical manner. But from your vantage point, you're certain you saw me commit the act of breaking the window? A slight sweat beaded on the guard's forehead. I didn't actually see the act of breaking it, but I heard glass shatter. Then I saw you there. Darius offered a courteous nod, turning to the prosecutor. So the witness did not see me commit any crime, but only found me near the scene? The prosecutor attempted an objection, but Judge Robertson waved him off, a bemused smirk still painted on his face. He was entertained by the novelty of a teenager's cross-examination, though convinced it would lead nowhere. But the subtle shift in the security guard's demeanor hinted there was more to this story. As the day wore on, the trial continued. Every piece of evidence Lowell presented, Darius countered with a focused question that cut away the assumptions. The store's management offered a statement that they found footprints near the broken window, but the footprints weren't conclusively matched to Darius's shoes. Another witness claimed to have heard shouting, but never identified the voices. By mid-afternoon, the tension between the prosecutor and the teenage defendant had escalated to a surprising duel of logic. The real shock came when Darius raised an argument that no one expected. Your Honor, under the Fourth Amendment, the evidence obtained might be tainted. He proceeded to outline how the initial police search was conducted without probable cause, referencing obscure case law, Mapp versus Ohio, Terry versus Ohio, among others. Judge Robertson's sneer evolved into something more guarded. He sat a little straighter. The mention of constitutional precedents from a 17-year-old was unusual. The press and spectators leaned in, half certain that the boy must be bluffing, reciting something half-learned from a Google search. But as Darius continued, it became apparent he had a nuanced understanding. During discovery, he explained, I found references to the police report indicating the officers first apprehended me because I looked suspicious. There was no mention of me actively committing vandalism or any probable cause beyond my presence outside the store. My motion is that any evidence found as a result of that unlawful stop is inadmissible under the exclusionary rule. Gasps fluttered through the gallery like startled birds. The concept was advanced, something typically reserved for experienced attorneys. Even the stoic court reporter blinked in surprise. Lowell's face hardened. This is a simple vandalism case, Your Honor. He's complicating matters. We have a witness who identified him. Darius pivoted smoothly. The witness didn't see me break the glass, only claims to have seen me near it. That's circumstantial at best. If the police had no probable cause to stop me, how can we trust subsequent identifications or evidence? Judge Robertson tapped his pen on the desk, brow furrowing. His voice emerged carefully neutral. I'll take this under advisement. It was one of the first hints that he wasn't entirely dismissive of the teen's argument. Yet beneath that veneer, a flicker of annoyance danced in the judge's eyes. It was as though he begrudged acknowledging any competence from Darius. Word spread through the courthouse corridors that a teenage defendant was outsmarting the prosecutor with technical arguments. During the lunch recess, attorneys who had never bothered to watch a vandalism case lingered to see the next stage unfold. Even the janitorial staff, in between their duties, paused outside the double doors to catch bits of the enthralling legal drama. Meanwhile, in a corner of the courthouse cafeteria, a group of attorneys whispered among themselves. A gray-haired defense lawyer named Rachel Mendoza couldn't hide her smile. I heard the kid cited Terry v. Ohio like a seasoned lawyer, she said. I mean, that's first-year law school stuff, but delivering it in court under pressure at 17? Remarkable. Her colleague, Bill Crane, nodded. I tried to approach him to offer some pro bono guidance, but he just politely thanked me and insisted he had it under control. That's either unbridled arrogance or raw talent. Back in the courtroom, Judge Robertson sipped from a Starbucks cup, visibly unsettled by the attention swirling around the day's proceeding. He was used to swift, decisive hearings, especially in cases involving young defendants. The only time his court gained such a buzz was when a high-profile murder suspect or a celebrity meltdown made the docket. Now, the entire courthouse seemed riveted to a small-time vandalism trial. When the proceedings resumed, the prosecutor advanced new angles, determined to corner Darius. He introduced a police officer's testimony, an officer, Greg Mason, who claimed Darius appeared irate and threatening during the arrest. As Officer Mason spoke, he glanced repeatedly at Judge Robertson, as if expecting the judge's usual synergy. "You were cursing at me," Officer Mason intoned, refused to comply. Darius's response was measured. "Sir, did I ever lay a hand on you or threaten you physically?" The officer shook his head. "No, but your attitude was aggressive." Darius tapped a pen on his notes. "And your report says you demanded I place my hands against the wall and submit to a search. Why was that?" Mason looked unsettled. "You fit the description of a suspect for property damage." "Fit the description meaning what exactly?" Darius pressed, maintaining composure. "A male in a red hoodie or a black teenager in a red hoodie?" How many other people in that area were wearing hoodies that night? A faint flush crept into the officer's cheeks. "I'm just doing my job." The teenage defendant nodded, a measured politeness that seemed out of place. "Yes, sir. But was there any direct evidence linking me to the broken window before you conducted your search?" Silence draped the room. Judge Robertson tapped his pen again, his expression tightening. It was evident that the line of questioning poked at the heart of potential racial profiling. The judge cleared his throat. "Move along, Mr. King. We get the gist." But the gist, as the onlookers understood, was that the usual easy condemnation of a young black man was faltering under unrelenting logic. By late afternoon, the atmosphere in the courtroom had transformed from mild curiosity to a crackling tension. Several spectators, who had come purely out of interest in seeing a teen self-represent, found themselves enthralled by every exchange. True to form, Judge Robertson displayed an undercurrent of disdain in his rulings, frequently sustaining the prosecution's objections with minimal explanation. Yet Darius never visibly flinched, forging on with a confidence that seemed to gain momentum by the hour. Things took a sharp turn when Darius called upon a surprise witness, his friend Martin Turner. The quiet teenager had been with Darius earlier that evening and had parted ways about 20 minutes before the alleged vandalism. Martin took the stand, looking nervously at Judge Robertson before glancing at Darius. "Martin," Darius began softly, "did you see me break any window that night?" Martin swallowed, his voice trembling a bit. "No, we were just hanging out, grabbing some snacks before heading home. We split up around 11:30 p.m. I hopped on my bike and left." Darius said he'd walk a bit to clear his head. The prosecutor eyed Martin skeptically. "You were both outside that Walgreens on the night of the vandalism, correct?" "Yes," Martin admitted. "But we didn't do anything. The window was intact when I left." Lowell tried to rattle Martin. "Isn't it possible Darius broke the window after you left?" Martin's eyes darted. I guess it's possible, but I never knew him to do anything like that." Then Darius asked something that caught everyone off guard. "Martin, can you share with the court what we talked about that night? What was on my mind?" Martin hesitated, taking a breath. Darius was worried about turning in his early college application to Stanford. He was stressed because, finances are tight. But we were just focusing on that, not on messing around with store windows. A murmur spread through the crowd. Stanford was no small ambition, especially for a kid from an underprivileged background. Even Judge Robertson's expression flickered momentarily, a spark of surprise crossing his features. Lowell tried to shift the narrative, asserting it was a simple deflection. But something about Martin's sincerity and Darius's quiet confidence began to puncture the aura of guilt that had initially surrounded him. For the first time, a subtle wave of doubt about the prosecution's story began to wash over even the judge. Though deeply entrenched in his biases, Robertson couldn't ignore that the teen's defense was methodical, with each argument stacking upon the last. The once certain conclusion of guilt was no longer guaranteed. As the trial reconvened the following morning, the court was packed. Even local TV stations had sent camera crews, capturing glimpses of the teen defender as they dubbed Darius in their broadcast teasers. The swirl of curiosity and speculation felt almost cinematic. The hush settled as soon as Judge Robertson entered, his black robe sweeping behind him like the trailing edge of a storm cloud. Darius arrived early, quietly reviewing his notes and scribbling last-minute details. Observers noted that while most defendants wore anxious expressions or defeat in their eyes, Darius radiated a thoughtful calm. Some might mistake it for arrogance, but anyone paying attention recognized it was sheer focus. When proceedings opened, Darius asked permission to present new evidence. Judge Robertson tilted his head, clearly annoyed at the possibility of more disruptions. Nevertheless, he nodded. "Proceed," he said. From his manila folder, Darius drew a printout of Walgreen's surveillance camera logs, which he'd acquired through a Freedom of Information Act request. The prosecutor started to object, but the judge allowed Darius to explain. "It took me a while to get these," Darius began, "but the logs show that the exterior cameras were operational that night until 11:40 p.m., 5 minutes before the incident. Then the system stopped recording due to a technical glitch." He paused, letting the significance of the timing sink in. "This means there was a nearly complete record of the outside area up until just before the vandalism. If I was loitering or acting suspicious earlier, the footage would show it." Lowell clenched his jaw. "That's inconclusive. Cameras fail sometimes." Darius nodded. "Exactly. But it does indicate that I wasn't captured doing anything prior to 11:40 p.m. So, unless I decided right at 11:45 to suddenly break a window, the circumstantial evidence is thin." Judge Robertson, drumming his fingers, asked, "And how does this prove your innocence, Mr. King?" "Glitches happen, as the prosecution says." With an air of calm confidence, Darius replied, "It doesn't conclusively prove it, Your Honor, but it raises reasonable doubt about the timeline presented. This so-called open and shut case might not be so open and shut after all." The quiet that followed was palpable. The crowd seemed collectively on the edge of their seats, waiting for the next big reveal. Judge Robertson's eyes flickered with unspoken frustration, as if he grappled between his own prejudices and the logic Darius presented. Meanwhile, news reporters quietly scribbled notes, anticipating a sensational headline if the teen managed to flip the narrative entirely. As the case wore on, the tension between Darius and Judge Robertson began to thicken. Subtle remarks from the bench, small jabs at Darius's age, or implied references to the defendant's unusual grasp of legalities piled up. Each comment signaled that the judge was growing increasingly uncomfortable with Darius's performance. That discomfort reached a boiling point when Darius called the final witness, an ITS specialist from the Walgreens headquarters who oversaw the chain's security systems. Introduced as Christine Hall, she was a composed, middle-aged woman carrying a laptop bag and a thick binder of technical documents. Darius guided her gently through her qualifications: a degree in computer science from the University of Illinois, 10 years of experience in retail security software, and direct oversight of Walgreens' digital surveillance logs. Then he asked the pivotal question, "Miss Hall, can you explain how the glitch occurred at 11:40 p.m. and why it affects our understanding of the incident?" Hall cleared her throat. We noticed that the camera malfunction wasn't random. A portion of the software was tampered with, leading to the abrupt halt in recording. A startled murmur rolled through the spectators. Even the judge looked surprised. The prosecutor objected. Speculation. We don't have evidence that it was tampered with by any relevant party. Darius produced a chain of custody document. According to Walgreen's internal logs, Miss Hall, who would have the authority to alter or shut down that camera feed. She glanced at her notes. Only senior security personnel, IT management at headquarters, or local law enforcement with a special override code. A random civilian wouldn't have the means or the password. This revelation sent a ripple of shock throughout the room. Had someone deliberately switched off the cameras? If so, why? And how did that tie to the charges against Darius? Judge Robertson narrowed his eyes. Mr. King, do you have evidence tying this alleged tampering to your case? Darius inhaled slowly, then replied, I do, Your Honor. He scanned the faces in the gallery, landing on one figure in particular, Officer Greg Mason, who seemed to shift uneasily in his seat. I believe there may be a reason the cameras were disabled just before my arrest. And it wasn't me who did it. The crowd leaned forward in collective anticipation. The tension was almost unbearable. The next step in this puzzle felt close, yet remained elusive. Even the judge, though frowning, gave Darius a begrudging nod to continue. With a measured calm that belied his years, Darius pressed on. I'd like to enter into evidence a police department internal memo I received through a local journalist's tip. It indicates certain officers, Officer Mason included, were under investigation for manipulating evidence. An audible gasp rippled through the courtroom, and for the first time that day, the confident veneer cracked around Officer Mason's stony face. Judge Robertson blinked, momentarily at a loss for words. This was no longer a simple vandalism hearing. Suddenly the story took on a darker, more complex shape, a shape that just might vindicate Darius once and for all. The next moments felt charged, like a live wire. Judge Robertson rapped his gavel to quell the rising babble in the room. The tension was so thick that even a single cough from the gallery sounded like a gunshot. All eyes locked on Darius as he carefully unfolded the memo in his hand. His voice remained unwavering as he addressed the judge. This document outlines an internal affairs investigation into Officer Mason and a few colleagues regarding allegations of falsifying reports and tampering with evidence to secure convictions. It's from 6 months ago, before my arrest. Lowell sprang to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. Irrelevant and prejudicial. There's no proof this ties specifically to the case at hand. Darius anticipated the objection. It establishes motive and credibility concerns, Your Honor. If Officer Mason was involved in tampering with camera footage to strengthen charges against certain suspects, then the entire basis for my arrest could be called into question. Judge Robertson looked between Lowell and Darius, his expression a mask of reluctant neutrality. Mr. King, are you suggesting Officer Mason intentionally shut down the Walgreens camera to cover up the fact that you didn't actually break the window? Darius met the judge's stare without flinching. I'm suggesting that the camera feed was cut off at precisely the time that could have proven my innocence. Officer Mason was on site early, well before the alleged incident, and he had the capability and, as the memo indicates, the inclination to manipulate evidence. You could practically feel the blood drain from Officer Mason's face. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, sending a wary glance at the prosecutor. The crowd muttered among themselves, the volume of astonishment rising. Judge Robertson rapped the gavel again. I'll allow this line of questioning, but I warn you, Mr. King, if this is a stunt, it's not a stunt, Your Honor, Darius said firmly. I have multiple forms of corroboration. He then motioned to Christine Hall, who, with impeccable timing, opened her laptop and accessed Walgreen's technical logs. Projected onto a screen, the logs showed a sudden override at 11:39 p.m. This override came from a police department login, she explained. The system recorded the IP address, which is assigned to a device used by Officer Mason's precinct. The crowd's reaction was electric. Even the cynical members of the press realized the explosive nature of this revelation. Judge Robertson's frown deepened and a slight tremor broke across his lips. He was cornered by the evidence. Lowell attempted to salvage the prosecution's stance, stuttering, This is still circumstantial." Perhaps the officer accessed the system for legitimate reasons. But the atmosphere in the courtroom was already changing. The quiet assumption of Darius's guilt now dissolved into a very real possibility that he'd been framed. An undercurrent of rage and disbelief emanated from the observers, as if they collectively realized the justice system they relied upon might have tried to bury an innocent teenager. Media outlets outside the courthouse scrambled to update their storylines. What began as a headline about a cocky teen defending himself against vandalism charges morphed into a potential expose on police corruption and systematic bias. Cameramen jostled for better angles. Eager reporters, microphones in hand, updated their teleprompter scripts. Inside the courtroom, Judge Robertson declared a short recess after the bombshell revelation. As the crowd filtered out, clusters of attorneys buzzed about the new developments. Darius quietly gathered his notes, ignoring the swirling attention. He was aware that eyes trailed him everywhere, but he remained focused on the case. During the recess, a few attorneys tried to corner Darius with whispered advice or offers of help, but he politely declined, his voice calm and unwavering. "I have it under control, thank you," he repeated like a mantra. Rumors spread quickly. Maybe the kid was a law prodigy or had an attorney father tutoring him behind the scenes. Yet no one seemed able to confirm. The tension in the corridors was almost tangible when Officer Mason stepped out of the courtroom. A local journalist shouted questions. Mason stiffened, muttering, "No comment," before disappearing into a staff-only hallway. The expressions on the court employees' faces told a story of deep unease. If the allegations held weight, the entire department's credibility hung in the balance. Over by the vending machines, the prosecutor, Lowell, conferred in hushed tones with a senior district attorney who'd rushed over to assist. They studied the internal affairs memo with intense scrutiny. Their faces revealed growing concern. If they failed to refute Darius's claims, this case would collapse in a spectacular implosion. Meanwhile, alone in a quiet corner, Darius made a phone call. He spoke softly but firmly, "Mom, it's all coming to light. Don't worry, I promise I'm okay. Just keep believing in me, all right?" He ended the call with a reassuring smile, though tension still lined his brow. The excitement and chaos in the courthouse threatened to overwhelm even the most seasoned adult. But Darius held steady. As the recess ended, the crowd filed back in. The clerk's voice echoed, "All rise," signaling Judge Robertson's return. His face was stern, perhaps more so than ever. He cleared his throat. "Court is back in session." The stage was set. In just a few more moves, the drama would either culminate in Darius's unexpected exoneration or unravel into confusion. Every spectator hung on the outcome, jaws tight with suspense. Judge Robertson glared across the room, his expression revealing a deeply rooted animosity, perhaps not just toward the defendant, but toward the possibility that his near-automatic assumptions had been wrong. The prosecutor reopened questioning to discredit the internal memo, arguing that its contents were pending investigation and not yet proven. Lowell contended that Officer Mason had never been formally charged. Internal Affairs looks into all sorts of allegations, Lowell insisted, most of which never lead to disciplinary action. Undeterred, Darius swiftly countered by calling Detective Joanne Morales from Internal Affairs to the stand. She appeared reluctant, as though dragged into a spotlight she didn't want. But once seated, she testified under oath. Yes, Officer Mason was under investigation. We had multiple complaints about him interfering with evidence. I can't confirm specifics of ongoing probes, but there is a pattern we're looking into. A hush fell over the courtroom. The tension was thick enough to slice. Judge Robertson peered down at Darius, the muscle in his jaw twitching as if he was fighting back a retort. Finally, he said in a low voice, "Proceed with your questioning, Mr. King." Darius's eyes flickered with resolute calm. "Detective, based on your knowledge, was there any reason?" Officer Mason would access a surveillance system in a minor vandalism case prior to an arrest. She cast a sidelong glance at Mason, who sat rigidly, arms folded. "It's not standard protocol, no. Typically, you'd review footage post-incident. Doing so beforehand is highly irregular." Lowell shot up again. "Objection. We are drifting into speculation about an officer's motives." Before Judge Robertson could respond, Darius spoke. "Your Honor, I'm establishing context. This goes directly to the credibility of the evidence used to charge me." For a moment, the judge hesitated. Then he waved his hand. "Overruled." Detective Morales continued, choosing her words carefully. "If an officer with advanced access wanted to remove exculpatory evidence, tampering with a camera feed prior to a crime being officially reported might prevent that footage from ever being recorded." The crowd stirred. The reality sank in. If the camera feed had been functional, it might have shown Darius walking away without doing anything illegal. Hence, the entire case against him could be fabricated or, at the very least, heavily manipulated. Lowell tried to rally, pressing the detective on whether they had conclusive proof that Mason specifically shut down those cameras. "No," Morales conceded. "The investigation is ongoing, but it's a strong possibility." Judge Robertson's pallor seemed to worsen. His once condescending attitude had morphed into a simmering fury. Darius King had turned the tables in a way few saw coming, least of all the judge himself. Where once Darius stood as a hapless teen in the defendant's seat, he now appeared more like a crusader, unveiling the misdeeds of a broken system. A restless tension throbbed in the courtroom. Everyone sensed the momentum shifting, and all eyes were on Judge Robertson, who tapped his pen harder against the bench with each new revelation. One could almost see the internal conflict behind his grey eyes, the reluctance to acknowledge that this black teenager, whom he'd so casually dismissed, might be right. In a bid to salvage his case, Lowell changed tactics. He introduced a recorded statement made by a store employee who claimed to have seen someone in a red hoodie near the broken window. "This testimony places the defendant at the scene," Lowell asserted. "No camera glitch can refute the eyewitness's account." Darius, unflustered, rose to respond. "Your Honor, I'd like permission to cross-reference that statement with the store employee's timesheet." Lowell blinked in confusion as Darius held up copies of the employee's shift schedule. "It shows that the employee clocked out at 11:15 p.m., Darius explained, 30 minutes before the incident. "Is it possible he lingered after work?" "Yes, but if he wasn't on the clock, the reliability of his statement is questionable." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Darius didn't stop there. Additionally, the same employee, in earlier statements, said he wasn't sure of the person's height or face, only the color of the hoodie. Judge Robertson's eyebrows rose, but his gaze remained cold. "Ah, you suggesting this employee outright lied? I'm suggesting he might have mistaken me for someone else," Darius said calmly. "Or he might have been pressured to say what the authorities wanted him to say." The store employee initially told the investigating officer he only thought it might be me. Now in the formal statement he claims certainty. That discrepancy matters. Lowell objected again, accusing Darius of defaming a witness. But the judge waved him off, his lips pursed. There was enough dissonance in the accounts to merit Darius's skepticism. The entire courtroom felt like a pot about to boil over. Some spectators quietly cheered for the teen's audacity. Others simply stared, stunned that the initial narrative young black kid does typical teenage vandalism had been so thoroughly dismantled. Where was this heading? Everyone's heart pounded with the sense that something bigger than a window-breaking charge was being tried. Outside the courthouse, a storm gathered in the October sky, dark clouds rolling in as if mirroring the tension inside. The wind picked up, scattering leaves across the courthouse steps. Media vans lined the street. Satellite dishes raised to broadcast the unfolding drama lived to local networks. Inside, Judge Robertson declared another brief recess to review the mounting pile of evidence and testimonies. Darius walked into the hallway, ignoring the flurry of cameras snapping his picture. He found a quiet corner again, pressing his back against the wall, closing his eyes for just a moment. His phone buzzed. It was a text from his mother. "I'm so proud of you." He allowed himself a small smile. The unwavering support from his single-parent household had always been the rock anchoring his ambitions. He glanced around to see Martin Turner approaching, eyes wide with excitement. "Dude, you're killing it in there," Martin whispered. "I can't believe you found all that evidence." Darius shrugged, modest. "Just had to follow the truth. Besides, I've been reading law textbooks since I was 14. Martin chuckled, shaking his head. "Of course you have. Only you would do that for fun." Nearby, a cluster of reporters huddled. One recognized Darius from earlier and tried to get a statement. "Young man, if you're proven innocent, what do you plan to do next?" Darius paused, chewing on his lower lip. "Graduate from high school, hopefully get into a good college," he said quietly. "Beyond that, I guess I want to keep studying law, help people who don't have a voice." The reporter's eyes lit with admiration, but Darius excused himself. He wasn't interested in the spotlight. He had a case to win. On returning to the courtroom, the heavy oak doors closed behind him, sealing him once more in the chamber that thrummed with public scrutiny. Judge Robertson sat on the bench, reading glasses perched low on his nose, sifting through the new documents. Whatever personal biases swirled beneath that robe, he knew he had to uphold the legal process at least to the letter, if not fully in spirit. His gavel struck the wood with a sharp crack. "All rise," intoned the bailiff. Everyone took their seats, bracing for the next step in this roller coaster trial. The storm outside intensified. Wind rattled the courthouse windows. It felt as though nature itself was bracing for the truth to thunder down. The next witness Darius called was an unexpected one, Sergeant Linda Reese, a veteran officer from the same precinct as Mason. Dressed in her crisp uniform, Reese stepped forward with visible reluctance. A hush enveloped the courtroom. It was unusual to see an active officer prepared to speak against a colleague. Darius began gently. "Sergeant Reese, can you confirm that on the night in question, you were dispatched to the Walgreens parking lot after receiving a call about a disturbance?" "Yes," she replied, her voice low. "I arrived shortly after midnight." Darius nodded. "Was Officer Mason already on the scene?" She hesitated, casting a glance toward Mason's direction. "Yes, he was there before me. In your experience, is it normal for an officer to arrive so quickly for a non-violent call?" Darius pressed. Reese's expression tightened. Mason was parked nearby, apparently. He responded to the radio dispatch almost immediately. Darius moved closer, making eye contact. "Did Officer Mason report anything suspicious about me or the incident before you arrived?" She glanced down at her folded hands. "He said he had a suspect in custody, said the kidder. You was acting hostile, but when I got there you seemed calm, which was contradictory. Darius's eyes flickered with quiet triumph. And did you, at any point, witness the broken glass or the alleged vandalism? She shook her head. No, it was already broken when I got there. Mason told me he saw you do it. But she trailed off. The courtroom leaned in, collectively holding its breath. Judge Robertson tapped his pen impatiently, urging her to continue. Reese swallowed hard, but he changed his story later, telling me the glass must have shattered when you shoved the window. She exhaled. That made no sense. Shoving a window doesn't typically break it that easily, especially the reinforced kind at Walgreens. A low murmur rippled through the spectators. The very officer backing Mason's account was now casting serious doubt on its authenticity. Lowell tried to object, but Judge Robertson waved him off. The mood in the courtroom was shifting in real time. Darius took a step back, letting Sergeant Reese's words hang in the air. Thank you, Sergeant. No further questions. As Reese left the stand, the tension soared. She had, in effect, testified that Mason's story lacked consistency, suggesting a fabrication that aligned with Darius's suspicion of evidence tampering. Judge Robertson's thin-lipped mouth pressed even tighter. In that moment, it felt like the last solid pillar propping up the prosecution's case had begun to crumble. In the corridor outside, the storm outside roared louder, rain pounding against the courthouse windows. The overhead lights flickered momentarily, as if the electricity itself was shaken by the revelations in the courtroom. Judge Robertson called for an extended lunch break, giving everyone time to process the morning's testimony. Reporters hounded Sergeant Reese for a statement as she exited, but she bypassed them with a curt, no comment. Meanwhile, Officer Mason nearly bolted from the room, muttering something about defamation and conspiracies. The thick tension parted around him, like the sea swallowing a drowning man. Darius felt the weight of a small victory, but knew the fight wasn't over. In the courthouse cafeteria, he sat by himself, nibbling on a turkey sandwich and reviewing his notes once more. A quiet hush spread around him, as if even strangers sensed he needed space. Over by the cashier, a clerk watched him with open admiration, whispering to a coworker that the kid's a legend in the making. Midway through lunch, a small group of law students who'd rushed over from the University of Chicago approached him, starry-eyed. "We've been following your case online," one said. "You're amazing. How did you learn so much about the law at your age?" Darius smiled politely, but offered only a polite shrug. "Libraries, mostly. I just read." Another student asked if he had a mentor or if he was part of a special program. "No," he replied. "I just saw things in my neighborhood that made me want to understand how the system works." Their wide-eyed admiration was cut short by an announcement over the intercom court was resuming earlier than scheduled due to new developments. Darius tossed his half-finished sandwich and hurried back upstairs, forging through the throng of media and spectators that clogged the halls. Returning to courtroom 14, he noticed a shift in Judge Robertson's demeanor. The judge's face looked drawn, his expression more severe than usual. Perhaps the weight of the damning evidence was beginning to crack even his stony exterior. In the front row, a group of locals from Darius's neighborhood had filed in, eyes brimming with hope that the truth would finally be recognized. As Darius settled at his table, he sensed the trial was reaching a pivotal moment. So much had been revealed, yet the outcome was not guaranteed. Judge Robertson's gavel knocked. The storm continued its drumbeat outside, a crescendo building with each heartbeat inside that packed courtroom. The first surprise of the afternoon session came when the prosecutor, Lowell, requested a private sidebar with the judge. There was a flurry of whispered arguments between them, out of earshot from the gallery, while Darius waited. Eventually, Judge Robertson cleared his throat, looking none too pleased. "It appears the prosecution has a development to share," he announced. Lowell stepped forward, adopting a grave tone. "Your Honor, due to the possibility of compromised evidence and the new testimony suggesting misconduct, the state would like to offer a plea disorderly conduct with no additional jail time." A stunned silence hit the room. Although not a full exoneration, it was a massive step down from the initial charges of vandalism. Essentially, the prosecutor was handing Darius a near dismissal if he just conceded some minor wrongdoing. People in the gallery exchanged confused glances. This was a partial surrender. Darius's jaw tightened. He looked up at Judge Robertson, who wore a thin, razor-sharp grin. It was as if the judge was saying, "You see, this is your way out, take it." But Darius shook his head. "I refuse the plea, Your Honor." A wave of shock rippled through the courtroom. Even some of Darius's supporters visibly flinched. Turning down a plea bargain could be risky. But Darius had come too far, uncovered too many lies. Accepting any guilt now would tarnish the truth he'd fought so hard to bring to light. Lowell tried to hide his frustration, but it was palpable. He knew the moment Darius refused, the next step could be an all-or-nothing decision for the court. Judge Robertson's face flickered with annoyance. "Mr. King, do you understand the implications of refusing a plea deal? You risk a guilty verdict on more serious charges." Darius set his shoulders straight, lifting his chin. "I do, Your Honor, but I'm innocent. I'm not going to say otherwise." A ripple of applause threatened to erupt from the spectators, but the bailiff quickly hushed them. The tension soared, the air buzzing with the sense that Darius had placed all his chips on the table. Judge Robertson's gaze bored into Darius, an undercurrent of anger simmering. It was evident he hadn't expected such steadfastness. Perhaps he wanted the teen to concede just enough to preserve the illusion of the court's unerring authority. But Darius was not about to grant that satisfaction. An electric hush followed, and each moment felt more precarious than the last. Judge Robertson, forcibly maintaining a neutral facade, looked down at his notes. When he spoke, his tone was steely and clipped. "Very well, Mr. King. Since you refuse the plea, we proceed to final arguments." Lowell shot Darius a curt nod, clearly frustrated. He stepped forward, orchestrating a last-ditch attempt to salvage the prosecution's stance. He pivoted away from the tampering accusations, focusing instead on the original statement from the security guard and the presence of Darius at the scene. "Let's not forget," he reminded the jury, "Darius King was found there, well past midnight, near the broken window. Even if there was no direct evidence of him breaking it, the coincidence is striking." He then tried to sway the court by reminding them that Darius had shown hostility during arrest. "An innocent mind doesn't resist lawful orders," he insisted. When Lowell finished, all eyes turned to Darius. The teen took a moment to organize his thoughts. Then he stood, exhaling slowly. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, voice calm yet resonant, "this case isn't just about a broken window. It's about the lengths people will go to confirm their biases. If it weren't for the accidental discovery of tampered camera logs, I might already have been labeled a vandal and a criminal. The police were ready to believe I did something wrong simply because I was there, wearing a red hoodie." His gaze swept across the faces in the jury box. "But we have no direct evidence tying me to the broken window. We have contradictory witness statements. We have serious questions about officer misconduct. And crucially, I never confessed, because I didn't do it." Darius allowed a short, poignant silence. Then he continued, "What's more likely, that I, a 17-year-old with no prior record, suddenly decided to smash a reinforced store window, then stuck around waiting to be caught? Or that someone was determined to pin the blame on me to close a case quickly, or perhaps to feed into a pattern of arrests that certain officers needed for their record? The air seemed to hold its breath. Even Judge Robertson, though his expression remained sour, could not interrupt this final, powerful plea. Darius concluded simply, "We deserve better from our justice system. I hope that after considering the evidence, you'll see the truth and acquit me of these charges. Thank you." Another hush fell, so profound that the rattle of the storm outside echoed like distant cannons. The jurors' eyes flicked uncertainly among themselves, grappling with the weight of a near-impossible scenario, whether to trust the usual authority or a teenager who'd systematically unraveled it. Judge Robertson cleared his throat once more. "We will now recess for jury deliberations." He signaled the bailiff. The gavel struck. It sounded final, ominous. In that single crack, the tension shattered, and the jury filed out to determine the fate of a teenager who had chosen to stand up alone against an entire system. Jury deliberations stretched across the afternoon and into early evening. The storm outside had finally passed, leaving the city wrapped in twilight. A subdued, electric expectation clung to the air. Spectators milled around, sipping coffee from courthouse vending machines and rehashing every twist. In a far corner, Darius's mother had arrived, her face etched with both concern and fierce pride. She stood next to him, rubbing his shoulders lightly. "You did everything you could," she whispered, voice unsteady. He nodded, exhausted but resolute. "We'll see." At last, word came that the jury had reached a verdict. Everyone scrambled back into the courtroom, hearts pounding. The 12 jurors filed in, solemn. Darius stood, hands clasped behind his back. Judge Robertson presided, trying to maintain his stern aura. "Foreperson, has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?" he asked. The foreperson, an older woman with kind eyes, stood. "Yes, Your Honor." Her voice was steady, but emotion lingered beneath. She passed the written verdict to the bailiff, who then handed it to the judge. For a moment, Judge Robertson read the slip silently. His expression revealed nothing. He was a fortress of neutrality. Then he turned to address the court. "In the case of People v. Darius King, on the charge of vandalism, how do you find the defendant?" The foreperson cleared her throat. "Not guilty." A tidal wave of relief washed through the gallery. A few onlookers cheered quietly, only to be hushed by the bailiff's stern glare. Darius stood there, momentarily stunned. Judge Robertson rapped the gavel once more, quickly drawing attention. "This court finds the defendant, Darius King, not guilty of vandalism," he pronounced, words clipped. Then, with the barest flicker of displeasure, he added, "The defendant is free to go." For an instant, it looked as though the judge might cut the session short and hurry off. But Darius's mother rushed forward, tears streaming down her cheeks, and wrapped her arms around her son. Reporters surged forward, bombarding them with questions. Darius swallowed, almost lightheaded. He turned to the judge, meeting his gaze. Judge Robertson tensed, but gave the slightest nod of acknowledgement, a reluctant concession to the teen who had bested the system. The swirl of cameras and excited chatter was overwhelming, but beneath it all, a surge of triumph and vindication burned in Darius's chest. He had not only cleared his name, he'd also exposed corruption in the process. Outside the windows, the last of the storm clouds parted, revealing a sky dusted with evening stars. It felt symbolic, as though a grim shadow had lifted, letting in the faint light of a new dawn. With the verdict delivered, a flood of questions and chaos ensued in the courthouse lobby. Journalists shoved microphones at Darius, demanding interviews. Local TV reporters tried to go live with the teen genius attorney. Even a few bystanders approached, congratulating him or snapping photos. The energy resembled the aftermath of a blockbuster movie premiere. Darius, however, felt drained. He gave a short statement to the press, emphasizing that he was grateful justice was served and hoping for reforms that prevent future injustices. Then he politely refused further interviews, determined to flee the spotlight. Outside, The night air was crisp, the moonlight gleaming on puddles left by the storm. Darius's mother clutched his arm as they walked down the courthouse steps. "I'm proud of you," she repeated, voice thick with emotion. "But are you sure you want to continue with this law dream? You've seen how dirty it can get." He gazed at the flickering streetlights. "All the more reason. People need to know the law isn't just a weapon, it can be a shield too." A wave of applause erupted behind them. A group of supporters from his neighborhood had gathered, chanting his name, "Darius! Darius!" They rushed forward, slapping him on the back, offering handshakes and even homemade flyers praising his courage. It was overwhelming but heartwarming. Amid the celebration, a short figure approached a woman in a formal suit, carrying a sleek attaché case. She introduced herself as Helen Strauss, a partner from a prominent law firm in downtown Chicago. "Mr. King," she said, her voice polished and assured, "I've been observing your case. I have to say, your acumen is rare. We'd be honored if you'd consider an internship with our firm once you finish high school." His mother's eyes went wide. Darius took a breath, stunned by this sudden opportunity. Before he could reply, Helen pressed a business card into his hand. "Call me. We'll make it worthwhile." Conflicted emotions swirled in Darius. The vindication was sweet, the interest from professional circles overwhelming. Yet he also remembered the heartbreak and fear he'd felt facing false charges. His mind reeled, trying to reconcile his triumph with the knowledge of how close he came to a different fate. For that night, though, it seemed everything was shining in his favor. The gloom of the storm had lifted, and the city's lights sparkled around him as if welcoming a new star in its firmament. Late that night, long after the reporters dispersed and the crowds went home, Darius finally returned to the modest apartment he shared with his mother. The living room was still cluttered with open textbooks, half-finished notes, and printouts from the case. For months, that space had been his war room. Sinking into their worn-out sofa, he let out a heavy sigh. His mother brought 2 mugs of hot chocolate, setting one in front of him. "I'm sorry you had to go through all that," she murmured. "I wish I could have protected you." Darius smiled, stirring the cocoa. "You protected me in every way that mattered, raising me, teaching me not to give up, instilling pride in who I am." She took a sip from her mug, tears forming again at the corners of her eyes. "I'm just glad the truth came out." For a while, they sat in silence, absorbing the gravity of the day. Then Darius looked at the corner of the room where a stack of college brochures lay. Stanford, Yale, University of Chicago, Howard, all places he dreamed of attending. The invitation from Helen Strauss flashed in his mind, an emblem of possibility he couldn't have imagined weeks before. He rose and flicked on their old laptop. As it whirred to life, he opened a new document. At the top of the page, he typed, "Applying for summer legal internship draft letter." His mother watched from across the room, her heart swelling with equal measures of pride and motherly concern. This was only the beginning. Darius had tasted victory in the most harrowing of circumstances, but it was a victory that also revealed how broken and unjust the system could be. He resolved then and there to become more than a fleeting headline. If the system persisted in targeting kids like him, he would become the unwavering advocate they needed. Weeks passed in a blur of interviews, legal follow-ups, and endless commentary on the case. Darius's name suddenly became a lightning rod for all sorts of social debates, teen rights, police reform, the intricacies of self-representation. Even a few national news outlets covered his story, describing him as a teen prodigy and unexpected champion of justice. During this time, Internal Affairs intensified their investigation of Officer Mason. Evidence of his tampering cropped up in more than one case, forcing prosecutors to review past convictions. In a highly publicized press conference, Mason resigned, and the district attorney opened the door for appeals on multiple convictions. The reverberations were huge. Some hailed Darius as a hero, others accused him of destroying public trust in law enforcement. Meanwhile, Judge Robertson faced his own crisis. Rumors circulated about a formal complaint lodged against him for allegedly biased conduct. Though the judge vehemently denied any wrongdoing, transcripts from the trial showed repeated moments of condescension and possible partiality. The state's Judicial Oversight Committee took notice. Suddenly, the seat that Judge Robertson held for decades felt far less secure. Darius heard bits and pieces of these developments through the news. His main focus, though, remained finishing high school and planning for his future. The thrill of delivering speeches on TV and hearing applause had faded, replaced by a sober sense of purpose. He kept reading case law late into the night, determined to broaden his understanding. One cold Friday afternoon, after final exams, Darius received a letter in the mail from the University of Chicago. Opening it with trembling fingers, he saw that it was an acceptance letter, complete with a substantial scholarship offer. Tears pricked at his eyes as he realized how much his hard work, both academically and in the courtroom, had paid off. That evening, celebrating with his mother in their small kitchen, Darius realized that the events of his trial had permanently changed him. He was no longer just a kid with a passion for law. He was someone who understood how quickly an innocent person could be cornered by a flawed system and how the right knowledge could shatter that trap. The following spring, Darius found himself in an unexpected position back in courtroom 14, but this time not as a defendant. A community activist group had invited him to speak at a special panel discussing reforms in juvenile justice. The irony wasn't lost on him as he stepped through the double doors into the same place that had nearly spelled his downfall. Reporters recognized him and snapped photos. A few attorneys from the district smiled or nodded respectfully. Among the audience sat some of the same people who had watched his trial unfold, curious citizens, law students, even Sergeant Reese, who gave him a warm wave. At the front of the room, Darius joined a panel that included civil rights lawyers, social workers, and a community leader from the South Side. The topic was preventing miscarriages of justice in youth cases. When his turn came to speak, Darius took the microphone. "I'm not a licensed attorney," he began, scanning the small but attentive crowd, "but I know what it's like to stand alone, with the entire system aimed at you, and to be presumed guilty from the start. I know how it feels to realize that the only weapon you have is knowledge of your rights." He paused, recalling the fear that gnawed at him as he walked into this very room so many months ago. "But I also learned something else. The law can be a sword or a shield, depending on who wields it and why. We need to ensure kids, especially those in marginalized communities, have access to legal education early. We need transparency in how evidence is gathered. We need accountability for those who misuse power." Applause broke out. It wasn't thunderous, but it was steady and sincere. Darius felt a surge of emotion as he realized this moment was bigger than him. He was part of a movement for change, one voice among many pushing back against injustice. As the panel concluded, a few audience members rushed forward, asking for autographs or photos. One young high school student looked at him with shining eyes. "I want to be like you," she said. "I never thought I could make a difference, but now I see it's possible." Darius smiled, words catching in his throat. "You can," he finally managed. "You definitely can." Meanwhile, the karmic wheels of justice kept turning for Judge Robertson. Multiple complaints about his conduct, both past and present, had come to a head. Allegations of racial bias and erratic rulings didn't vanish quietly this time. The media attention from Darius's case had shone a glaring spotlight on courtroom practices that many had long suspected but never proven. A formal investigation by the state's Judicial Commission began scrutinizing old transcripts, interviewing attorneys who had faced Robertson. The phrase pattern of bias cropped up repeatedly in official memos. The judge's once invincible reputation was beginning to buckle under the weight of mounting evidence. One afternoon, while Darius was at home drafting his new internship cover letter, his phone buzzed with an alert. Judge Robertson under review for misconduct, possible suspension or removal from bench. He stared at the headline, a swirl of emotions passing through him. The teenage part of him felt vindicated here, was the man who'd nearly destroyed his life, finally facing repercussions. Yet he also felt a tinge of sadness that the system had allowed such a person to wield power unchecked for so long. Within weeks, Robertson was forced into early retirement, effectively ending his judicial career in disgrace. While not the harshest punishment some had hoped for, it was a resounding fall from grace. In a short statement to the press, Robertson blamed media sensationalism and political correctness for his downfall, never once conceding any personal wrongdoing. Darius's mother showed him the news segment that evening, quietly remarking, "I guess that's the end of that chapter." He nodded, watching the TV screen show Robertson's stoic face as he left the courthouse for the last time. "I guess so," Darius answered. Yet he sensed that the story was bigger than this one man's disgrace. It was about planting seeds for a fairer system, one that wouldn't let prejudice and arrogance crush innocent lives. Graduation day arrived faster than Darius could have imagined. He stood in the courtyard of his high school, clad in a borrowed cap and gown, the tassel swinging in the early summer breeze. Students milled around, hugging, snapping selfies, signing yearbooks. The anticipation of freedom and new beginnings buzzed like electricity in the air. A small group of classmates approached Darius, congratulating him on the scholarship to the University of Chicago. They also teased him about being famous, referencing his day in court. Though the hype had died down, the story of his trial still lingered on local social media as an urban legend of sorts. Principal Larson, a stern but fair educator, patted Darius on the back. "I always knew you had something special," he said, "but I never expected you to blow the lid off an entire system before you even got your diploma." The ceremony began in the school auditorium. With each name called, roars of applause echoed through the space. When the principal announced Darius King, the cheers erupted louder than he'd ever heard. Even teachers who'd once worried about his quiet, sometimes distant demeanor were on their feet, clapping. Stepping across the stage, Darius accepted his diploma with a grin. He looked out into the audience, spotting his mother in the front row, tears of pride glistening. He saw Martin Turner and a few other friends cheering him on. He remembered every late-night study session, every anxious moment poring over legal documents, every brush with doubt. The principal handed him a small award, the Perseverance Award, a special accolade created just for him. The crowd gave a standing ovation. Darius felt his heart swell. The label of troublemaker had finally been replaced by something else, a symbol of potential, of triumph, of justice. That summer, Darius stepped into the polished lobby of Strauss and Associates, the firm that had extended him an internship offer. Glass walls and modern art pieces spoke of prestige and ambition. He was assigned a small cubicle, but to him, it felt like stepping onto the threshold of an empire. Each day, he was mentored by actual attorneys working on civil rights litigation, corporate law, and even pro bono cases for underprivileged clients. Whenever they asked how he knew so much about case law, he'd smile and reply, "Trial by fire." One afternoon, he accompanied a senior associate to a hearing downtown. The clang of the courthouse metal detectors and the echo of footsteps in its marble halls brought back a flood of memories. As they passed courtroom 14, he paused briefly, peering through the tinted glass panel. The bench stood empty, with a new judge presiding now. The memory of Judge Robertson's sneer flashed in Darius's mind, but the haunting sting had faded, replaced by resolve. He pressed on, following his mentor to another courtroom. There, he watched real attorneys defend clients who couldn't afford top-dollar representation. The arguments, the tension, the stakes, they reminded him of his own trial, except these defendants had skilled counsel. Darius leaned forward, arms folded, eyes alight with understanding. Soon, he found himself offering quiet suggestions to his mentor, a statute to check, a detail to clarify. His mentor gave him a curious look, half smiling. "Kid, you're unstoppable." Darius shrugged, but warmth bloomed in his chest. Yes, he'd left behind the old nightmares of the past year, but they continued to fuel him. He resolved that once he graduated law school, he would dedicate himself to representing young people and others whom the system too often failed. As the day ended, he glanced at the worn manila folder in his backpack, the same one he used in his trial. Though battered, it reminded him of how far he'd come and how much further he intended to go. By the time autumn leaves began to fall, Darius was settling into a routine as a college freshman at the University of Chicago. Between classes on political science, ethics, and pre-law, he juggled volunteer work at a local community legal clinic. His name circulated among professors who marveled at his real-world courtroom experience. Some nights, he'd sit in the university's grand library, recalling how it all began, a single mistake by an officer, or perhaps a deliberate act of profiling that put him in the defendant's seat. He'd remember the scornful laughter of Judge Robertson, the wave of fear that threatened to drown him, and how knowledge, painstakingly acquired, became his lifeline. He would think about the thousands of kids out there who wouldn't have the resources to defend themselves. That recollection stoked the fire inside him. He wasn't just in law school to chase prestige. He was there to ensure no one else would stand alone in a courtroom, disbelieved, and have their future nearly stolen because of systemic prejudice. Meanwhile, back in Chicago's legal circles, stories still circulated about the boy who beat the system. Offers for speaking engagements trickled in, and Darius carefully chose ones that aligned with his drive for reform rather than mere sensationalism. Occasionally, he'd receive postcards from well-wishers, strangers who found hope in his story. Each postcard reminded him that his journey resonated far beyond that single courtroom. It had become a beacon for those who felt voiceless, proving that one determined individual could topple the mightiest towers of bias. And so, a new chapter began. The teen who had once walked into courtroom, 14, wearing an ill-fitted shirt and tie, carrying only a manila folder and a stubborn belief in justice, was now on the path to becoming one of the youngest, most passionate lawyers his city might ever see. His story continued, fueled by the conviction that even the darkest prejudice can be dispelled by the undeniable light of truth. Thank you for joining us on this roller coaster journey through prejudice, perseverance, and, ultimately, redemption. We've witnessed a courageous teen unravel a web of corruption inside a courtroom that once seemed bent on burying him. Through determination, knowledge, and a fierce will to fight for what's right, Darius King not only cleared his own name, but also sparked changes that exposed systemic flaws. In doing so, he transformed from a lone defendant into a beacon of hope for countless others. If you found this story uplifting and stirring, please show your